Chris Lee, Blake Lovell, and Blayne Gilmer, 14, here to preview the LSU Tigers for the coming season. Gentlemen, not what we expected from LSU a year ago. This was a team that was picked by most people 5th or 6th in the league. Had a writer at Media Days last week tell me, hey, I think that Brian Kelly opened practice last year to let us see what he was up against. Well, surprise, LSU goes and wins the West. Didn't go so well in the SEC title game, but ahead of schedule is Brian Kelly for things in Baton Rouge, Blake, and now the Tigers with a chance to maybe win the West again this year.
They could certainly do it. And as we talked about when we, when I filled out my ballot at SEC Media Day, I picked Tigers to do just that. And, the reason why we will probably get into over the next 30 minutes, and you'll really understand why that is, because when you go down this group here, I mean, there's obviously the proven, the stuff that's coming back that just completely wows you. But then there's also the stuff that's coming back that, some people may look at and say, well, I'm maybe not sure about that area. But when you really dig pretty deep into this team, I think on both sides of the ball, there is so much there to like. And it obviously is never a bad thing when you can start with a Heisman Trophy contender at quarterback. And that's always a nice luxury to have, surrounded by a supporting cast that is just, what else do you say? I think the wide receiver position, just fantastic group. And there's just, it is wild that we're having this conversation based off of what they did last season, because we all remember kind of what this preview was like last year, right? We were all kind of thinking, man, I don't know where LSU finishes in the SEC West, but I can tell you that none of us thought they were going to finish at the top. This year, much different conversation, and that does speak to what Brian Kelly has done in a very short time. They're building a team like this that, quite frankly, should have national championship aspirations.
Experience and continuity. Experience and continuity. Those are the words that people should be excited about when it comes to LSU, because even the influx of talent that they've gotten sprinkled in there in the transfer portal, a lot of those guys have experience either in SEC programs or were big time players at their previous programs. And then all the amount of returning production that LSU has is astounding on both sides of the ball in terms of the big time playmakers, the key positions. LSU is primed and ready to go. And as you pointed out, Chris, Brian Kelly has the Tigers in a position that I think people expected maybe they would be arriving at this year, maybe next year, but it is here and they are ready to kind of cement their spot in the SEC West. They could end the SEC West era as back-to-back champions, because this is the last year of division. So that is something that Tiger fans would relish tremendously if they could close out the division era as West champions.
Well, gentlemen, my pick to win the West has also been LSU. Although, for full disclosure, we just did Alabama before we did this. I don't know when that will get on the feed for people to see it, but as we do it chronologically, we just did Alabama. I'm a little nervous after seeing how much talent Alabama's got. I think in terms of 1 to 85 on the roster, Alabama's got more. But it's where it is, guys. And I've been asked by many people as I go on radio shows, when they say, who are you picking for the West? And I say LSU. The question is always why. And I say, well, look, quarterback to me is a separator between Alabama and LSU. And that's no surprise for anybody watching the video. But Alabama, we don't know any of which of the three guys it'll be. None of them have really proven themselves as college quarterbacks. On the other hand, you have Jayden Daniels, who a year ago, guys, was pretty darn good, ran for nearly 900 yards, threw for nearly 3,000. And one thing that I think it's underrated, that touchdown to interception ratio, 17-3. When in doubt, I go with, do I trust your quarterback situation? That is one of the separators. And I don't know that there's a quarterback situation, Blake, that I trust more than LSU's. It's not just Jayden Daniels. It's also Garrett Nussmeyer as their backup.
Yeah, I mean, it's just you feel like you saw a guy really progress last year, and you feel like he's only going to get better. And that's a scary thought because of how good he was at times last season. And like you said, just didn't make a lot of mistakes. And I think sometimes we can oversimplify what it means to be a great quarterback. And sometimes it's not always about, throwing for 500 yards, right? Sometimes it's just putting your team in a position on every offensive possession to have a chance and not making the mistakes that take those chances away. And Jayden Daniels really didn't do that a whole lot, right? Only 3 interceptions, like you said. And so I think it's a guy who's a year older now. It's a guy, Blayne talked about, it's just the continuity with the guys they have coming back. It's the chemistry that's there between them. And yes, that's like I said earlier. He's got to be a Heisman Trophy type candidate just based on what the expectations are for LSU as a whole. But again, it's just, I think what he can do, not just throwing the ball, right? Like, it's what he can do with his legs. Now, sometimes that was out of necessity, and we'll talk about the offensive line in a second, which I think that's really going to help because I feel like they're going to be improved because of, the bulk of that group returns. So I don't know how you could ask for a much better setup for Jayden Daniels heading into the season. And again, that's kind of a scary thought because, you saw a lot of great things from him last year. And now I think a year older, having that experience now in SEC play, all those things that you combine together and then the supporting cast he has, there's not a lot not to like about what Jayden Daniels could do this season.
I'm going to make a little interesting parallel for you. Remember in the 2021 season for the Georgia Bulldogs, Stetson Bennett ended up taking over the quarterback position and leading Georgia to success? Well, going into last year, Jayden Daniels was in a quarterback competition at the beginning of the season. He wasn't even named the starter until right before the beginning of the season. He wasn't the guy and ended up going and have the success that he had. Well, what happened that next offseason in Bennett's situation? He was named the guy. He had the entire offseason to lead and be that guy. Well, Jayden Daniels is about to benefit from the same thing. He's got this whole offseason with Mike Denbrock, year 2 in the system, to say, okay, this is our leader. This is our guy. Build that rapport with those receivers that are coming back. In my estimation, the best receivers that I know we'll talk about in the entirety of the SEC as a collective unit. And to have that there, and also to have a guy the quality of Garrett Nussmeyer pushing you consistently, because Garrett Nussmeyer is not just content to say, okay, I'm just going to ride the pine. He's going to try to develop. I heard Brian Kelly say the reason that he was able to bring both Jayden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeyer back and keep both of them in the program is because they were convinced, both Nussmeyer and Daniels, that they could both develop this year inside of that program. And that's a kudos to Mike Denbrock for being able to put the amount of trust out there that he's earned with those guys for them to see that. So I agree with Blake. I think Jayden Daniels, we just saw the tip of the iceberg last year, so to speak. And I think the improvement is going to be pretty astounding in year 2 under Mike Denbrock and Brian Kelly.
Well, and I got to hand it to you. I remember middle of last season, or maybe it was late last season, you made a comment LSU had the best group of receivers, and I think you might have been including tight ends of anybody in the league. That made Tennessee fans a little upset, and maybe rightfully so, but maybe you had a pretty good point there, and I think that's going to really pop for them this year. They've got arguably the best tight end in the league in Mason Taylor, son of an NFL Hall of Famer. You look, they've got Brian Thomas is a nice number 2 guy. They've got maybe the best number 1 guy in the league in Malik Nabors, who had over 1,000 yards a year ago. They got Brian Thomas, who's played. Chris Hilton's played a little bit. If you include the tight end room, they've just got dudes to throw to all over the place, guys.
Yeah, I think Kyron Lacy is a name that isn't going to get enough credit as well because he's as tough as nails, and he showed out in the spring. He's a guy that I think is going to really be that chain mover type guy for LSU this year, because everybody, like you said, is going to be keying on Malik Nabors. But when you look at the talent and the depth that they have at the wide receiver position, let's look at, it's a good mix of guys. You get that true number 1 that can be an inside, that can move around in Malik Nabors. You can put him in the slot and match him up on a safety if you want to, or put him outside and on the best corner on the defense, and he's going to win those matchups. But then to add in little pieces like a totally underrated and not well known right now, Landon Ibieta, that's at the slot, made great plays in the spring game for LSU. Then, of course, Brian Thomas, who's more of the rangy possession type receiver, big, tall guy out there. We mentioned Kyron Lacey, tough as nails. And, oh, by the way, you have Aaron Anderson, who is from the New Orleans area, Edna Carr High School, I believe, who transfers back in. He was a 5-star recruit, transfers back in from Alabama, didn't see the field much for Alabama last year, but just being involved in that program, he brings an element of, awareness and just being better for being at the University of Alabama. And now being able to come to LSU, Blake, I just don't see many weaknesses to point out in that LSU wide receiving core.
No, it's not. I mean, I don't know. I know the stats been thrown out. One of the publications had, I think, 5 players returning with at least 20 receptions last year. One of those, Josh Williams, of course, running back. But I mean, still, right? Like that think about it's the continuity. Blayne said the magic word earlier. Think about the continuity that's there between Jayden Daniels and all those guys, and just having even more reps now under their belt, and continuing to get those reps together. And again, that's just going to make them more familiar with each other. That's going to give these playmakers an opportunity to make more plays. And, when you do start the conversation with a guy like Malik Nabors and able to keep going down this list, like you said, with a Lacey, the guy that could move the chains, obviously Mason Taylor, we know he's able to, and you just keep going down the line. You're like, okay, well, that could be the guy that makes that big play in that one game that, gets LSU a field goal win over an Alabama or something like that. They don't just have 2 or 3 of those guys. It feels like they've got, 6, 7, 8 type guys who could make that one play that you need in a span of some of those games. And again, you go down the list, and there's so many options, and that's always a good thing to have in the SEC, because guys are going to get injured. It's going to happen. Like, you're going to have some of those kind of scenarios where other guys have to step up. And with this group, there are so many guys that could step up and fill some of these spots again, should someone get injured, and you just have kind of those, the grind that comes with playing an SEC schedule. So
here's another thing they got on this offense. A bunch of running backs who seem like they've been there forever. You start with Josh Williams, who's the presumed number 1, missed some time a year ago, led them in rushing for all players not named Jayden Daniels. They got Noah Cain, who's been there a while. He had 76 carries for 413 a year ago. Armani Goodwin's been there and played a couple of years. John Emery Jr., I never would have guessed back in 2019 he'd still be at LSU, much less the 4th-string tailback, but that's where he is. He's been a quality back for them, had some off-field issues, I guess, and been in and out of the doghouse, but he's still there. Talented kid. And then they had Logan Diggs from Notre Dame, who had more yards rushing than any of those guys a year ago. I have no idea where the carries are going to get split here. But the one thing is that they have got the options to withstand injury or whatever comes their way, Blayne.
Yeah, I think those running backs are going to need to take more of a role, right, in order to lessen the beating that Jayden Daniels. We saw what happened in the Texas A&M game. There's only so many hits people have, okay, before you get dinged up. So I think getting more production out of that, but that also just tied in with the offensive line and some experience there and things like that. But you saw Josh Williams start to come on at the end of the year last year and be productive, be efficient with things. Noah Cain, like you said, he's been successful in the Big Ten with Penn State, came down to LSU, maybe hadn't gone exactly as good as he'd wanted it to, but whether it's Armani Goodwin, all of these guys that you point out, the depth is there, Blake, and I think they're going to be able to keep those backs fresh and rolling guys and not really have much of a drop off there.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think we could say that, like I said, about this pretty much entire offense, right? There's not a drop off when you look at just a lot. I mean, pretty much every position on this side of the ball. There's just, even going to the quarterback, like we said, right? Like, even if it were to be a Nussmeyer, like, it's different, but there's not much drop off when you look at just the depth that they have on this side of the ball. And again, having a lot of guys returning on the offensive line really helps, because I think that helps everyone around them, specifically just, again, limiting sacks too on Daniels and those kind of things. So I know we've kind of gone across the board here on the offense, but I think there's a reason for that, because there's not a lot of drop off in these areas for this team.
Yeah, guys, you pay the price when you start true freshman tackles, which they did all year a year ago, and they gave up 41 sacks or whatever it was, and that's with a mobile quarterback. So, as you guys pointed out, he got hit a lot, but these are not two ordinary tackles. Will Campbell is going to be a top half of the first rounder in a couple of years. Emory Jones, I think, has got a pro future. Then you look across the line. Okay, you move one spot inside to the left. They got Miles Frazier coming back, who started I think all 14 games a year, had over 800 snaps. He's a 2019 recruit, so he's been around and played a good bit. Charles Turner III, the starting center, another 2019 guy, played almost 800 snaps a year ago. Got a backup behind him, and Marlon Martinez had 155 snaps last year. Right guard, Garrett Dellinger, almost 400 snaps last year. So they got some experience there. They brought in DJ Chester, who's a pretty highly regarded recruit. I don't know if he'll play for them, but he slots in at right guard, maybe in a backup role. Then we talked about Jones. This is the team, guys, that has got some talent and a lot of guys who played a lot of snaps, and that's a really good recipe.
They even have Mason Lunsford, who they brought in from Maryland, who I think had 23 starts to his credit for Maryland. So, he's a guy
I knew I was forgetting somebody.
Well, I mean, he brings in just more experience. And like you said, when you got – this is what we talked about when we did the Alabama film, right? We said the one concern, even more so maybe than quarterback for Alabama, was how are they going to manufacture quality depth at the offensive line with so many young guys that are in there too deep? Well, at LSU, you don't have to worry about that guy because these guys have been there. They brought in Lunsford, who is going to bring some depth. So you got literally 7 guys who have played quality snaps and have played a lot of football at LSU. Then you mix in maybe a talented freshman as the 8th guy there. That gives me confidence for Jayden Daniels and for this run game, Blake.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's the word, like, and we've kind of gone around it, right? But we pretty much all said it. It's confidence. That's why we are where we are on LSU, is the confidence in this group specifically. And yes, I think that's the key word. It's just there's so much confidence when you look at all these different positions, and you just don't feel like there are many questions here on this side of the ball.
Yeah, I count 4 guys who are either 4th or 5th year seniors who will either start or be key backups. And again, we talk about the tackle situation. So good shape there are the Tigers, especially compared to a year ago. All right, defense. I think that's the bigger question with this bunch, guys. But look, you start with Harold Perkins, who was arguably the defensive player of the year in the league this year. I guess Kool-Aid McKinstry could have an argument there, but Perkins is going to be on that short list. And remember, guys, that they did this a year ago without some key guys, and getting Mason Smith back. He's probably going to be a first-team All-SEC guy. Inside was top 15 recruit back in 2020. They got some other guys in there. Mekhi Wingo, another first-team All-SEC candidate. The front 7 is maybe not vintage LSU in terms of just dudes everywhere, but there's plenty of star power, and I think they're going to be good enough to get as far as they need to get this year, Blayne.
Yeah, I mean, and here's the thing that Brian Kelly said about the defense and about Harold Perkins. He said last year he was just an athlete. He wasn't learning. He didn't know how to play linebacker. He didn't know how to – they were just out there trying to put him in places where he could use his athleticism, and boy, did he. He said now he has learned how to play linebacker, and they're going to be able to move him inside more instead of at the edge where he was. And one reason they say that is a big benefit for LSU is because last year when Harold Perkins was out there, people could – if you're on the edge, they can slide the protection to you. They can add a tight end to chip over there. Now you line him up in the middle. You don't know where he's going to be pre-snap. He could be in the middle. He could walk out to the edge. He could do different things. And it's more of okay, now do we fan our protection? Do we close our protection down to account for Harold Perkins? And if they do one of those things and try to account more guys for him, they believe with Mason Smith back in the middle healthy, they have between him and Mekhi Wingo and Savion Jones, they have guys who, if they get that one-on-one matchup, they can win it. And that makes this LSU front 7 even more dangerous than it was a year ago, which is an interesting thing in terms of, because it created some havoc last year, even more so than I think people expected. And then of course you have the Ovi Ahofu that transferred in that jack role that, Texas, Notre Dame, he's been around high profile programs, and he's going to be able to help the depth and probably be a starting key guy there for LSU this year, Blake.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think just getting Smith and Wingo back, from the injuries, and that's always the biggest thing, especially, for someone like Smith, coming off of a significant injury, and I know Wingo, didn't do anything, spring wise, just to kind of heal up the shoulder and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's starts with Perkins, as you guys mentioned. I mean, I think that's the most known, certainly, and what he brings, and the disruption again of what they can do with all these guys that they do have now available, getting guys back, like you said, from injury, and then the guys they have coming in that are going to add to that sort of dynamic on defense, proven guys. And Blayne said this earlier, and I think that's the key part we were talking about. The guys that LSU's bringing in, it's not just guys, right? It's guys who have proven themselves at other top level kind of, maybe it's not SEC guys at every spot, but it is guys who have that proven production elsewhere. And I think that is something that is very important, is getting some of these guys from the other power conferences and all that. I think that's what stands out to me about this defense is, yes, you're going to have some other guys added to the mix to join, the knowns and the guys that they have coming in. But what you're bringing in is a lot of guys who have kind of proven it at schools that maybe, aren't in the SEC, but it's not like, the Pac-12 and other places. I mean, it's just, yeah, I mean, you've got guys who have proven it elsewhere, and I think that's important.
Blake, I'm glad you brought that up. I'm not going to say I buried the lead on the defense, because the lead would be Perkins and moving inside and getting Smith back. But you brought up a very interesting point. Let me just give you some facts and figures on their transfers in the front seven. Jalen Lee from Florida started 3 games a year ago for the Gators. He's probably their third guy at nose tackle. They brought Tyge Hill, who's going to be a reserve guy on their defensive line. Excuse me, Jordan Jefferson's the guy that transferred from West Virginia. My apologies. Yeah, he started all 12 games a year ago, 9.5 stops for loss, which is a pretty good number for a 305-pound guy playing the middle. They don't always rack up tackle totals, but he was very productive on the stat sheet. You mentioned Ogufu, I guess, is the name of the kid from Texas who's starting at the Jack, started a dozen games for the Longhorns a year ago. I'm sure I botched the name, so my apologies. They bring in Braden Swinson, who was a reserve at Oregon, played a dozen games a year ago, and Omar Spates, who was probably one of the better linebackers in the Pac-12 at Oregon State. So pretty good shape are the Tigers on the front seven. Again, Greg Penn III, we never really got into him, but he's a guy that's played a lot of ball in this league and played pretty well. So just a lot of dudes for LSU that have played a lot of ball. Then they bring in Deshaun Womack, who was a top 50 recruit. We'll see whether he plays or not, but just a lot of guys up front, and that's always something you want in the SEC. Guys, I guess the biggest question with LSU is going to be the secondary, and LSU's had some dudes, especially at corner, the last few years. I don't see that on paper for them this year. They've got some good players. Major Burns has played a lot of ball. Greg Brooks at safety has been a very productive guy for them. But I don't know that they've got the guy that just screams at you on corner like a lot of years they've had. Now, they did bring Zy Alexander from Southeast Louisiana, where he was very productive, 3 picks a year ago. He's considered an NFL prospect. Blayne, I'll start with you. What do you make of the state of LSU's secondary here?
And I'm going to get to the secondary in just a second. I did want to comment one more thing. You mentioned a couple of names there, Deshaun Womack. I wanted to add Quincy Wiggins to that, and also Whit Weeks. These are all guys that Georgia, and I got to point this out because they're the standard, right? LSU feels, Brian Kelly said Georgia's the standard. These are all 3 guys that LSU went head-to-head with Georgia for to get, ended up in, and they beat them and ended up bringing those guys in. So that tells you the type of talent they pulled in the reserve guys. Omar Spates as well, all Pac-12 guy, is going to be a tremendous asset to LSU, not only on the field, but off the field as well with leadership. Now, to the secondary, I think the Terrence Welch is overlooked a little bit. He's a really good corner, but they also added, as Blake said, they didn't add no scrubs. Okay. they added Denver Harris and J.K. Johnson, who come from highly talented, highly, sought after recruiting classes of Texas A&M and Ohio State, respectively. So they've added some depth there. You mentioned Deuce Chestnut. He comes in, he can play nickel, he can play corner, different things like that. So I think, to your point, maybe not household names, but guys that are immensely talented, do have something to prove. So they'll probably be a little bit hungry. But, a year ago, Major Burns had to play, and he wasn't necessarily ready. I don't know that they were excited about, hey, Major Burns is playing for us right now. But I think given that what he was able to do and able to make it through, I think that is going to be a big benefit there, Blake, with in the back end with Burns and Brooks coming back with that experience and then just making the pieces fit around them.
Listen, we could have just stopped this early, like 3 minutes into the conversation, because Blayne hit on the two words that, like, it's just been it's experience and continuity. Like, Blayne had it. Like, that's the catchphrase. Like, that's got to be a T-shirt at some point, right? Like, we gotta have that. Yeah, a little purple and gold. Experience and continuity, because it is like you said, it's the experience, man, of not just guys get coming back, but guys who have played elsewhere and have played. Like, again, that's the key word. Like, they're not just guys who you're hoping on, necessarily potential, but you have seen it elsewhere. And so I think that's the biggest key, knowing that, like Chris said when we started kind of this part of the conversation, yes, you have more questions on defense, but that is in comparison to an offense that feels like it is just clicking everywhere. And yes, it's fair to question some of these spots on defense, but it's not like they're lacking options here, because they've got a great starting point, like we said. But I think some of these new guys are adding to the mix are only going to help probably, shore up some of these areas they have on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and I apologize when I let off that segment. They brought in so many impact transfers. You just kind of run off a list of names and then realize you forgot a couple guys. You mentioned Denver Harris. He may be the backup, but he was a very highly regarded 5-star kid at Texas A&M, top 25 recruit. He'll be a second-year guy. So that's a dude with talent. Deuce Chestnut, a guy that played for Syracuse, which I think was fairly good on the defensive side of the ball. He started 12 games each of the last 2 years at Syracuse. Was an honorable mention All-ACC guy. Last year was a first-team freshman All-American guy in 21. This is a kid who's been a productive corner from the jump at Syracuse in the ACC, and now he'll presumably be their starting nickel. Special teams guys, I don't know how much we really have to go into of note here. Jay Bramlett's back for them again. Their punter who's been there a bit. Aaron Anderson will be interesting as a punt returner, transfer from Alabama. Didn't see the field there a ton, but
you go back and look at his high school film. He's a score waiting to happen. I'm telling you, he's dangerous in the return game. That's always an element that LSU under Brian Kelly has said, hey, we want to get better at. That cost them, special teams specifically cost them in the SEC championship game last year. But having a key guy at returner like that, that's going to be big. And, 5'8", 180 pounds, quick, shifty guy reminds me of, I don't know if you watched Friday Night Lights, but Boobie Miles kept calling Chris Comer Waterbug. Well, that's what I get reminded of when I see Aaron Anderson, Waterbug over there, being able to return the football.
Is LSU the only school that doesn't have a punter or a kicker from Australia? I feel like we've done these, and I look at the hometowns. That for whatever reason, LSU has neglected Australia as a recruiting ground. So let's get on that, LSU. All right, wrapping it up, guys. The opener with Florida State, again, going to be one of the games to watch. We previewed the Tigers' schedule in another video. A little bit of a pass-out week 2. And in Mississippi State, Arkansas, Ole Miss, Missouri, Auburn, the SEC games just keep coming. You got a game with Army in between, which always is a challenge based on style of play. So that's how the Tigers' schedule sets up. Let's get our parting thoughts on LSU, whether it's a schedule-related thing or something we didn't get to. Blake, I'll start with you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it starts in week 1. I mean, it's, we say that about some teams, but, like, I think if you want a really good idea of where LSU stands, obviously game 1 against Florida State will give us just that, and then I think from there it's, looking at some of the we talked about this in the schedule preview. That early part of the schedule, there are landmines everywhere. At Mississippi State, at Ole Miss, at Missouri, like I always said, weird things can happen there. Like that's it's not a slate that's going to stand out just from a top 25 standpoint, because as of right now, again, I'm talking about just the stretch beyond Florida State. Ole Miss is the only team ranked in there at this moment, but like even a game against Arkansas at home, right? Defending a KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sanders and kind of what that offense could be there. There are things like that early on the schedule, but beyond that, yes, you've got to go to Alabama. But again, they only play one game outside of Baton Rouge after October the 7th. And I think it's trying to navigate that early part of the schedule, knowing you've got a lot of games that are away from home in that stretch. But if you can navigate that, if you can put it all together early on, you are rewarded on the back end with all these home games that you're going to have there in Baton Rouge. So, yeah, I think that's it, guys. I mean, this team is talented enough, as we said, to win the SEC West again. I think they're talented enough to win the national championship if some of the things come together, like we mentioned. If you plug in some of these guys defensively and they're as good as you think they could be, offense, I just don't really have any questions. I think Jayden Daniels continues to take a big step forward. I think he's got enough playmakers around them that they will put up a lot of points. And yeah, I really like this LSU team heading into the season.
Experience and continuity were the two words. I'm going to add another one to it is physicality. I think another year in the strength and conditioning program under Brian Kelly. I think another year of that offensive line getting bigger and stronger and used to the SEC. LSU's dangerous. LSU's my pick to win the West, and I think those are the reasons why.
Yeah, here's my parting thought on LSU. Better get these guys now, and that's not easy now, but it feels like they're just getting better under Brian Kelly. The talent certainly slipped a little bit at the end of Ed Ogeron's tenure. The discipline absolutely slipped. Kelly was a disciplinarian. He was going to come in and get that cleaned up, and that doesn't always go well in year one. I was really impressed that he was able to do it the way that he did it. And look, if you played the season out again last year, I don't know if LSU wins the West again, but that's the way the game is played. You get one chance at it. They got to the title game. Yes, it was not pretty when they got there, but just a really testament to Brian Kelly, how he had his team overachieving a year ago. I just love the direction of this program. This is going to be a program that gets back to the heights that LSU wants to be at, and a pretty good chance that that's this year too. Again, I picked LSU to win the West, and I think the more that I look at it, yes, Alabama's going to give LSU a run for its money. LSU is probably not as good at Alabama in some parts, but I think the parts where it counts the most, especially at quarterback, that's where I give the Tigers the edge, and it'll be fascinating to see what LSU does this year under Brian Kelly. All right, we are getting near the end of our preview series. We're doing this one in late July. We either have previewed or will preview very soon the remaining SEC teams. Best way to catch all those previews, hit the subscribe button, enable your notifications, and hit the like button. That helps our analytics. We also cover baseball, and we cover basketball. We cover those when stuff happens, even in the offseason. We get you the news that matters. So I hope you will stick around on our channel and watch some of our other content. For Blayne Gilmer and Blake Lovell, I'm Chris Lee. Thanks for watching our LSU preview here at Southeastern 14.